Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. My name is Matthew and today we're doing another figure comparison. Today we're doing a figure comparison between some Playmates Kong figures, specifically the Kong Skull Island variety, with Kong Skull Island, the 6-inch version, original, and the reissue. And I know what you're thinking. Matthew, didn't you already do a video like this a few years back? Well, yes. Yes, I did. It was my review slash comparison of this guy. However, I feel like with that video being a lot shorter and plus more focused on trying to be both a review and a comparison between this guy and this guy, I didn't really have a lot of the way of actually pointing out all the little intricate details, which is what we're going to be doing today. Another reason why I also want to talk about it is because I also want to bring in this guy. I'll actually put him behind. There's enough room. Yeah, there's a bit of enough room. The 11-inch Giant Kong. Now, I actually, because I am aware that there's a reissue of this guy as well as there's him, I actually did come across the reissue of this guy in person once at a collectible store. However, I neglected to pick it up because I just thought, I already own this, why do I need another? And plus, at that point, it's already taken enough space, so there's really no point in me having that. Plus, this was a gift, so thank you. So we're also going to be dropping in this guy in, but he's not going to be the center focus. These two are going to be the center focus. So, we're going to do pretty much another, multi-category thing. You know how it's done. It's not a versus, it's just a general figure comparison to see what the general differences are. And I'll be giving my personal input as to which one I think is overall executed better, featuring sculpt and paint, articulation, size, accessories, price, availability, and packaging. Even though a lot of those are pretty much the same or identical across all boards, there is some differences between the two. So, without further ado, let's go in. Starting with the heads on both figures, and I can automatically tell you that there is some pretty obvious differences. The overall sculpt is pretty much the exact same. They feature the same ears, the same facial expressions, the same very cool looking jawline. This guy's been mogging, as the kids have been saying nowadays. Trust me, I've been seeing it all over my TikTok, YouTube Shorts, and Instagram Reels like crazy. And the overall paint is really where it's different. However, we're going to talk about the eyes. The eyes on the original, well, actually both of them, feature like an orange. However, the application itself is kind of mismatched between the two. On this one, mine's a teensy bit off on both of them, but it's nothing like overjarring. This one has its pupil all the way to the right, which I have to say does not look good whatsoever. It honestly just looks, it looks weird seeing like the pupil or the eyeball onto one side, and you can see where the sculpt of the eyeball is. And speaking of the color, the eyeball is actually different colors on both figures. How? Because all that's painted on the eyeball is literally just the orange. That's it. The little circle that makes up the eyeball is actually just the base color of the skin, which is actually a little different because here it's darker, here it's lighter, which is kind of an opposite effect with the fur. Because you're going to notice like a very recurring theme is that for the skin, they chose to lighten it up, well actually lighten it up on here and darken it up here versus the fur where it's lighter here, darker here. So that's a bit of a difference when it comes to the overall mold. However, another thing I also like to point out is the little schmutz that came with my Kong right out of the box. Maybe it's because it's open box and like maybe some kid was just like hammering this thing like across the board or something on the Walmart shelf or whatever. And like, again, I got this guy used, so he's probably a little bit worn down, but there's a teeny tiny little paint rub right where the tip of my finger is. It's hard to see on camera, even zoomed in. And just to talk about the Giant Kong, it kind of does a similar thing with, obviously in line with the 6-inch original version, where it has a darker spray, lighter paint fur. I'm kind of noticing there's some spray on the fur here, but it has the open mouth and a bit of a more angrier, kind of ticked off expression, with kind of black pupils as opposed to the base color, probably because people will actually be noticing it versus on the smaller one where, you won't really notice it until you point it out. And the teeth are molded pretty decently. I've got a tiny little nick where it's like painted. And my real only gripe is that the bottom teeth are just kind of smushed, almost like he pushed his tongue too hard, and then all of his bottom teeth are now pointing straight forward. But aside from that, it looks fine, especially head on. Next, let's talk about the chest, which again, kind of similar to the face. It's darker here and lighter here. However, something that I kind of find a little interesting is the way that the scar is painted. It's so hard to see unless I'm going nuts. But this is actually pointing a little upward more so than this one. This is like a little. The best way I can describe it is that this is 1 o'clock on the clock arm. This is 2 o'clock. You see what I'm trying to say? Like, that's as best as I can describe it. The highlights are done very identically, but it's definitely not the same. Especially like down here where we have a bit more of darker color scheme here. Even though mine's got like a bit of a nick going down towards the belly button. Which is not defined on either one, really. But again, that's just kind of more where it's at. And to bring in the giant one again, we have more of like the spray kind of going across, almost like a kind of like a plus sign. Because we have it down here, then we have it like right at the breasts there, and then we have it like even more so than the reissue con. Because like, look at that, and then look at that. So at that point, we're like not even at 3 o'clock. We're like, I guess that's more like 1 o'clock, 1.5, and then this is 2 o'clock. So there you go. That's 2 o'clock on the dollar essentially. But again, we got some nice coloring there, and honestly, in my opinion, it might just be because it's the biggest, but this honestly looks the best. Even though mine's got a little bit of nick right to the right. And lastly, we're going to pretty much be talking about the arms and the legs, well, more specifically the hands and the feet. Because essentially that is the last main difference with the sculpt and paint. Because again, across both figures, the sculpt is essentially the same. As you can see here, we have a bit of a darker spray for the palms and like the finger area of the original, plus a bit more of the like the darker color of the toes, and it's a bit more on the tips. It's not exactly on the entire fist versus on the gray here with the fists of the reissue, and even like on the lower feet, which again looks really good, and I have to give Playmates credit to where it's due. Personally, I prefer the look of this one a bit more than this one because it's a bit more widespread and it's not just on a tiny part of the figure. It's kind of more on the entirety of the feet. And even like going down here, I mean, you can kind of see which one's black, which one's gray. So again, looks the part and honestly looks great. And finally, let's talk about the Giant Kong's arms and legs. So again, more specifically, the hands and the feet. The hands and the feet kind of do what I wanted to see from this guy, although I guess kind of not in this scale, because now it just looks like he's wearing big black latex gloves and little like pads on his feet. And it honestly, again, just looks a little odd, especially like how dark it is compared to like, say, the spray on his body, because the gray is not as, well, it's just gray. This is like solid black. Like, again, it just looks like gloves. So if the colors was a bit lighter, just a teensy bit, not like jet black, I feel like this would have been the perfect paint application for Kong. So overall, this pretty much wraps up the sculpt and paint section, because that's essentially it. Pretty much where there's paint, it's all different, but where there's sculpt, it's all different. So nothing's different. That being said, I feel like my personal favorite would honestly have to be the giant version, because it has a lot of the things that I like, and even though all three are different shades of the fur, because that one's a bit more red, this one's a bit more brown, this one's a bit more dark brown, I kind of like this one because it just looks the most movie accurate to me, being like a very vibrant color, as opposed to it being a bit more dulled up with these two. But if I had to pick between these two, I would honestly have to say if this Kong had his head pattern on it, well, the coloring on the head, and then the body kind of remained, then that would be like the definitive one. So really, it's I guess him technically, but whatever. That's my personal input. Now, on to articulation and build quality. Now, you might be wondering why build quality. Well, we'll talk about that in just a sec. Now, articulation is one of the things that's pretty different as well. It's pretty similar on both of them because they're the exact same. But well, might as well run through it anyway. So I'm gonna leave my camera up a little bit. For Kong, the original, we have a hinge. Yes, it is a hinge at the head, so you can kind of go up and down and go left and right. So it's pretty much the most expressive part about this figure. And you can kind of go up about that far, down about that far, and can do pretty much a full 360. No resistance there. For the shoulders, you have a basic rotation, so you can go kind of 360, fairly fair range there. Nothing at the elbow or wrist, despite the fact that there's an obvious cut for a wrist joint. There's nothing at the waist, but for the hips, we can go backwards, or we can go turn this way about this far before it stops, and turn back about this far before it stops. So we can't do a complete 360. And honestly, that's kind of crummy considering the fact that literally the shoulders can do it, but not the legs can. But the feet can also do 360s. Same thing applies to the reissue. Head on a hinge, swivel hinge, shoulders are on swivels, legs are on swivels, and the feet are on swivels. Same sort of limited range too, by the way. So what seems like the big issue? Well, the big difference when it comes to build quality. Well, actually, I pretty much have touched on this before, but my biggest problem with these older Godzilla Kong figures from Playmates is that the build quality of them just sucks. And if you need proof, look at the seam line here versus the seam line here. Now, at first glance, they look similar until you realize that the plastic here is splitting a bit more than it is here. Same thing goes for about, I want to say the sides of the figures, because moving the shoulders of both figures up a little bit more, you can tell that the plastic is starting to split more on here than it is here. And even though, like, the legs, even though both of the legs are rather put together well, I can't say the same thing about the crotch. Like, that looks fine. That does not. And also, the joints, because the limbs are actually made of a soft kind of rubbery vinyl as opposed to being hard plastic, over time you're going to actually see plastic rubbage. So that's the plastic scraping up against what I speculate to be either this part or just like the whole thing in general. So yeah, I don't think it's going to happen to the feet really, because like it's not touching the outskirts of the ankle here and where the foot turns. But that's honestly something you got to look out for when it comes to these things. And also, if you're wondering about the Giant, it does not, well, there's really nothing different as far as the articulation goes, except for two things. One, it actually features wrist swivels, unlike its 6-inch counterpart, plus something for, like a grabby hand for something to hold, except it doesn't come with anything for it to hold. And the head is only on a swivel and nothing more. There's no up and down, like, trust me. I am actually applying some decent force to it. I don't want to put any more force on it because otherwise it might break. It does go up and down a little bit, but I think it's just because it's riveting inside the joint socket. Oh, and one more thing. Legs can go a full 360. So no, it's not just in a scaled up version, it's actually kind of different. Now, size and accessories we can pretty much skip because they literally come with nothing and they're the exact same size. Anyone who has collected 6-inch action figures knows how big these things are. In fact, you may already own at least one of these things. That being said, moving on to price, at retail these things were about like I think 11, 12 bucks at Walmart and Targets. I think, because remember, for a while, these figures were exclusive to Walmart. But then eventually they began like expanding until the Toho series line ended, which was essentially just a rebranded Godzilla and Kong line. In fact, later down the line, he was actually rebranded to Classic Kong, which doesn't really make sense because one, he's not Toho. Toho had nothing to do with Kong Skull Island, aside from the after credits scene and the Godzilla references. And two, can you really call something from 2017 a classic film? Sure, it was 7 years ago, and I was a completely different age back then, but when I see classic, I think vintage. The Kong Skull Island is not vintage, even though it's set in the 70s. You get what I'm trying to say. But that being said, that's pretty much the same price you're going to get for these things, not on the aftermarket, but like at retail. Availability. Neither of these guys are available on shelves anymore. But the one Kong Skull Island figure that is the ferocious Kong with the boat. Sorry, not was it a boat? The chain propeller. I know there's a chain propeller. I'm trying to think. Was that a boat though? No, I think it was a helicopter. Actually, it was a helicopter. It would make sense if it was a boat, but I mean, I don't think Playmates ever made a figure with a boat. That comes to mind at least. Technically, there's the submarine with Tiamat, so. But as for right here, that's pretty much, again, the availability of both of them are subject to the aftermarket. Him especially, because he's a more recent release. And packaging, I can outright say that there is one thing different. And grabbing my Kong Skull Island 6-inch box, that's kind of like on the shelf a little bit, because I got him like so long ago, and like, it's actually kind of dusty. But here's my original Kong Skull Island box. So essentially, he was in the box like this. Like, okay, let's actually kind of plop the camera up a little bit. So he was in the camera. Sorry, he was in the camera. He was in the box like this. And as a result, this box was honestly really cool. I know it's like in the same format as the Godzilla line boxes were. As you can tell, Kong Skull Island, little read up, and of course little sides. I think like what you really have to come down to is the differences between the box and the reissue are not really that different. In fact, essentially, this Kong box had like just basic text on the side. That was the only difference. It said Kong, that's it, to match the Godzilla in Japanese or in kanji, and have the Godzilla 2000 again, just to make them look similar. In fact, I think I think it's the same Kong as this one is on that box. So as you can kind of tell, this box has really not much difference. You can look it up online. And just to go over this guy, size, accessories, this guy's pretty much 11-inch. There's no accessories. Price was about $20 as opposed to $10 for the 6-inch ones. Availability, also subject to the aftermarket. They're not making these original figures anymore. Availability, again, also subject. And box was like a bigger scale version of that box, except it was, again, just a lot beefier, and I don't have that box anymore, I don't think. Actually, wait, no, I don't have it anymore. I thought I did, but no, I don't have those boxes anymore. So overall, I think that pretty much concludes the entire comparison between all the Kongs that Playmates has released for the original wave of Kong Skull Island figures. Not the new Ferocious Kong, just these three. The original reissue of this guy and this guy. Even though there's a reissue of him, it's literally just it's identical, and I didn't really need to pick it up. But from what we have here, it's essentially a generalized difference. This guy has like a bit of a light-ish. He has the lightest, and he has like a darker versus the skin tones where these two are darker, but this guy's lighter. So he's kind of opposite to what he is, even though they look pretty much like the movie Kong. And honestly, as for the best version, I'm gonna have to say it's this one, because actually Yeah, it's definitely this one I favor over these two. The reason being is because the build quality is just a lot better, and the sculpt, well, the sculpt work is already good, but the paint work just, again, looks a lot better to me, and it, again, just looks a lot better. So, before I start repeating lips again, that's it for this video. If you guys liked it, definitely subscribe to the channel. Believe in Jesus. There's something those that say really nice, really awesome. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace out, everyone. God bless.